Hello all. So today I wanted to follow up my previous video with a few examples of the divide in the UK. So I started looking and I saw an article in the Telegraph that was running about 4 days ago, but unfortunately the Telegraph has a paywall, and keeping to my principles of being a tight-walleted northerner, I stopped right there. So instead I found a few older articles which I feel are still valid in the discussion. So I'm starting with a New York Times article from March. It's called "Of Civil Wars and Family Feuds, Brexit is more divisive than ever." So it starts, Hemel Hempstead. In England, Martin Bradford played guitar at a local venue for the better part of a decade, but he avoids the place now because performing there would mean working with its sound engineer. He recalls how he casually mentioned his vote to leave the European Union and instantly lost a friend. "You've taken my retirement away," he was told, as the sound engineer had hoped to move to a European Union country. "Once the conversation had happened, there was no going back," said Mr. Bradford, who also avoids members of his old band after some posted comments on social media that, he said, painted the people who voted leave as racists, bigots, evil and stupid. Now, this is only too common to hear from Remainers. Even still, you hear things like they didn't know what they were voting for, they don't like immigrants. And in fact, on LBC, James O'Brien, LBC, the radio station, I used to listen to him all the time, he said exactly these things, that how can Leavers be so stupid to the damage that they're doing? Well, that's not going to help anybody if we talk like that. So continuing on, according to one survey, more than a third of those who wish to remain in the European Union would be upset if a close relative married a strong Leave supporter. We'll be discussing another article a bit later talking about that. But basically, in the aftermath of the referendum, Relate, which is a counselling service, said that a fifth of 300 relationship support practitioners surveyed had worked with clients who argued over Brexit. And analysts say Britons are increasingly likely to define themselves in relation to Brexit rather than allegiance to party, a dividing line noticed by psychotherapists too. I would have to agree with that. There is very much this divide between Brexit and no Brexit, and the party politics lines don't seem to come into it as much. Anyway, of course, this article goes on, many Britons have tuned out, bored by endless and incomprehensible Brexit twists in Parliament. To be fair, I'm guilty of this myself to a degree, but this is important. It's an important subject, and particularly doing these videos has helped me get much more into what's going on behind the scenes. We do have to discuss this stuff. So, in this article, Giles Fraser, a rector of St Mary's Church in Newington, South London, said that people are talking past each other in a way that perhaps believers and non-believers might talk past each other. It's definitely visceral, it's definitely nasty, and there are certainly people who won't accept the core of the other person's positions. He believes that support for Brexit in London, which generally voted the other way, cost him friends. In Maiden Vale, a former mining village in Nottinghamshire, where most people voted Leave, Chris Hawkins said, "I can't honestly think of anyone from Maiden Vale among my group of friends or people I know who voted Remain, apart from myself." After arguments about Brexit, Mr Hawkins sees less of his two best friends, who now tend to socialise or take bike rides without him. With his parents, there's been tension, though the major conflict was with his partner's relatives. He said, "We've not been invited to family birthday parties or get-togethers post-referendum, whereas before we were." Now, it's sad to hear stories like this, but this is how the world works. Works best when we have differing opinions and ways of doing things. We're not all the same. We have to come to terms that different people have different feelings. We'll continue on. Candida Yates, Professor Professor of Culture and Communication at Bournemouth University, is researching Brexit sentiment. Her idea was to get two groups in the same room, but when that proved impossible, she initially met them separately. For the Remainers, it was rather like a bereavement group, she said. There was this huge sense of loss. People talked about waking up on that day of the vote crying and in shock that they didn't fully understand it themselves. They understood that they were upset, but why did they feel so strongly? So it was a bit like a therapy group. Now, for Leavers, there was more a sense of grievance than grief, Mrs. Yates said, and a feeling that they had been left behind, they had been forgotten. It was really this town-city divide. Winning the referendum was an unexpected victory. Some described it as a gift, but a precarious one. They couldn't quite believe their luck, and also said, even then, back in 2016, it's going to be taken away. They were saying they won't let us have it. There was, and I would argue still is, a real feeling of them and us, and a feeling of powerlessness. More recently, Ms. Yates managed to cajole two groups into the same room. People talked about it being like a civil war. Well, I understand why people might say this, but I do find it ridiculous and rather too grandiose a term to use for this. Continuing on, for Andrew Parnell, a software trainer who lives in Derby, Brexit has also caused family tension. In his case, with his niece, a Leave supporter. We don't talk much now. It has poisoned the well, he said. Mr. Parnell recalls crying on the morning of the referendum and says he feels emotional still. In his former office, everyone knew his views, and at Christmas, the referendum turned satirical in his Secret Santa gift, a signed copy of a photograph of the Brexit campaigner Nigel Farage. Chucked it in the bin, he said. Everyone else was getting bottles of wine and saying thank you. I was jumping up and down on a picture. Now, that is one of the saddest stories I've heard for a couple of reasons. These people have allowed Brexit to come between them and their families. I mean, I have disagreements with my families, some on the Brexit issue, but we respect each other and we accept that we have differences. But secondly, there just seems to be a loss of humour when it comes to Brexit. When we can't laugh, then we really are in trouble. I'm sorry, but I refuse to have this mindset, and I would hope others would think the same way. I really would hope that. So moving on to the second article from January 2019 in the Times. Brexit Remoaners more bothered by differing views in family, poll shows. More than a third of Remainers would be upset if a close relative married a strong Leave supporter, and almost 2/3 say that all or most of their friends share their stance on Brexit. Leavers, however, are comparatively more likely to say they have Remain supporting friends, and are also significantly less likely to be concerned at the prospect of welcoming an EU supporter into their family. Polling by YouGov states that when it comes to welcoming those with opposing Brexit stances into the family, it is the Remainers who are markedly more resistant. Asked if they would be troubled if a close relative married a strong Leave supporter, 37% said that they would mind, 11% by a lot, and 26% by a little. The equivalent finding for Leavers is 9%, and only 2% said they would mind a lot. The findings are likely to deliver a blow to some Remainers' self-image as more outward-looking and tolerant than those who took the opposite course, while challenging caricatures of Leavers as the more insular tribe. The poll also found that younger voters were more likely to care about Brexit's stance of a future member of their extended family than other respondents. Only 53% of those aged between 18 and 24 would not mind at all if a close relative intended to marry a Leaver. Now, reading this article, do I have any less respect for my Remainer friends? No. I do understand why they're doing it and the reasons, but this is an anathema to me. I really do not understand how you could hold these views consistently. This country has historically been one in the middle of politics. Yes, this debate has split the country, but we all have a responsibility to make sure that this does not get out of hand. Looking at it with these examples, and I'm sure many more like it, you may even know some yourself, I realise we have a way to go, but tolerance and understanding is the key here. Thank you for your time. Like, subscribe, and comment and share if you appreciate what we do.